Welcome to the SuperHero Conversations, a podcast saga with innovation leaders who will be at SuperNova, the #1 tech innovation event in Benelux, happening in the end of March 2025 in Antwerp, Belgium. I'm your host, Dominic Duchuk, and in today's episode, I welcome the superhero of the Belgian tech ecosystem, Xavier Damman, the founder of Open Collective. Welcome, Xavier. It's really good to have you on because I think not many people know you from the Belgian ecosystem, but you were the first one to kind of build up this entrepreneurship startup environment in Belgium. So could you take me through what have you done in your career? What are you doing now? What are your plans for the future?
Wow. How long do we have? How much time do we have? Look, I was not the first one. I was part of the first ones, right? Maybe like back in 2009, it was the beginning of TechCrunch and, kind of the Web 2.0. And it was really a good time. And I tried to do a startup in Belgium and I couldn't raise money here. I tried in Paris and I said all right, fuck it. I'm just going to go where those startups are actually blossoming, right? I didn't want to fight the environment. So I just went to Silicon Valley, went to San Francisco, one-way ticket. And then, to do my first startup, which was called Storyfy. It was the beginning of Twitter and all of those social media, Instagram, and so on. And so the platform was basically a way for journalists and other storytellers to make stories by drag and dropping different elements coming from social media. So it would be a way to curate and tell the story as being seen and shared by the people on the ground. That was called Storyfy. And, it's always, looking back, it feels like easier than it sounds, but I like the saying that says it takes time to become an overnight success. So it took me literally for the first year, I was nobody, right? I didn't do Stanford. I did, computer science here in Belgium, but nobody knew where Belgium was almost. So I was pitching and nobody would react. And it's a bit discouraging a bit at first, but then you cannot stop a man or a woman who never stop. And as long as you keep grinding and you keep also listening, getting feedback from the community that you're trying to serve, eventually you are bound to be successful.
Fantastic. So talk me through what are the first stepping stones? You arriving in San Francisco airport, did you have any connections? Did you have any plans of what you were doing next?
No, nothing. So it was interesting. I had a friend, Laurent Schnorrer, also a great person in the ecosystem here in Belgium. He got ticket for the Google I.O. conference and then he invited me to come along with him because his partner couldn't come. And then we thought we had a beer here, not far from here in the center of Brussels. And we thought hey, why don't we invite others as well? And that's how we started the first web mission, where we will go every year around Google I.O. to bring a bunch of people in the tech scene in Belgium to Silicon Valley to visit. So I ended up going there for a week as part of the first web mission. And that's how we started meeting local people who were already there, local Belgians, including Jeremy Levan, who became a friend, and he went on to create Sunrise later on. So when I came back with my suitcase a month later, at least I already knew Jeremy, and that was basically the only person I kind of knew. And then you just basically, walk from coffee shops and find a cheap place to live with roommates and stuff. And it's fun. It was another
That's
fun,
really cool. And did you find the kind of the co-founders or the first kind of core team in Silicon Valley as well?
Yeah, so at the beginning I was trying to do it on my own, trying to find people. It's hard, and things really started changing when I stopped pitching, and I basically started listening. Going to different meetups, better understanding what are the people that I'm trying to serve, what is it that they want, and what are the new opportunities that arise because of new technologies and so on. And then that's how I basically ended up building literally over a weekend, a quick hack. It was called the Listy Monkey. You can look it up on YouTube, I think. A very kind of Google Alerts meet Twitter list back then. And that overnight, basically, it became featured on TechCrunch, Mashable, all of those kind of blogs of the time. And it was good because it showed that actually it's easy to have a tunnel vision and be so focused on your on your idea or preconceived ideas that sometimes it's good to take a step back and look, okay, what does the world actually need right now? And once you really tap into what the world really needs, it doesn't take long to hit a nerve. And then then people, all of a sudden, they recognized me. Oh, okay, like even though I didn't do Stanford, like, okay, this guy can build software. And that's how I basically ended up getting myself a network in San Francisco, and also ended up finding my co-founder, the person who will become my co-founder for Storify. And then Storify, same thing actually. While I was working for years, literally, to get my initial product to take off, and it was not taking off, at some point I decided to basically scratch it all, start a new GitHub repo, and start from scratch with all the learnings that I had accumulated. And that's where, like, also same things, actually, it took a month to get a first prototype that we were able to show to TechCrunch Disrupt, that conference that has been featured in the Silicon Valley series. And then a few months later, we were on the New York Times, and we were able to raise the first check of $2 million with a VC in Silicon Valley. And then from there, like, things continued to accelerate. But yeah, it was an interesting experience that basically once you hit this product market fit, you know it, right? And until then, it's good to every now and then take a step back, breathe, look around, ask questions around you, see what's possible, and try fresh. I love this image, of artists, in cartoons. Like, you will see them like scratching something on paper, and then they will, throw it away and start again. They don't try to fix it until it's great. No, they don't hesitate to throw it away and start again. And that's the thing that I find it's hard, because you get emotionally attached to all the months of work that you put there. But actually, it's never fully thrown away, because you've learned so much you don't know. But I think it's really good to be able to throw away and start again, because find another angle.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. And I think what you mentioned, that it took so long to become an overnight success. And, time-wise, before the TechCrunch and the New York Post featuring, how long did you have to work for to get that overnight success?
It's been like, it depends when do you start counting, right? Because I started working a bit in Belgium, but then from arriving in San Francisco, it took like a full year.
A full year.
Yeah,
a full year of absolutely nothing.
Yeah, where you saw, like, it's hard to get a visa to stay for more than 3 months. Like, I had to go through 5 different visas. Like, there's a lot of other things going on in the meantime. And so you doubt, and what am I doing here? And so you just keep on, if you believe in your mission, if you believe in your vision, then you're going to be unstoppable. But yeah, there's definitely moments of doubt.
That's really fascinating. And, you've launched the first kind of MVP, got the initial investments inside the company. Could you walk me through what happened next after that?
What happened next? Then it's kind of the classic Silicon Valley story, right? Where you basically get an office space, and then the first office space we had was actually in the building of Twitter.
The old one.
The old one. And then we moved to our own office space. And then it's great, like, we were sub-renting the office space with other good people, like from Buffer, the company that also ended up being really big, becoming a really big company. And it was just so nice. It was kind of this environment where it felt to me like Florence during the Renaissance, right? It was 2008, 2009, the economic crisis was really a dark age. A bit like now, actually, in a way. But then, like, over there in San Francisco, there was kind of this, all of the people around the world, the designers, the engineers, the entrepreneurs would come, and under the protections of the Medicis, the angel investors, the VCs, I will basically give those people money to just, forget about the dark age of the economic turmoil right now. Just imagine and dream what can be built, what can be done now that we have access to that new technology, now that people start having internet in their pocket. And that was just so inspiring. And it was really nice. Every coffee place you will go to, there will be people pitching their idea to angel investors. There will be like meetups. People going out in San Francisco means going to a meetup and basically showing off the hack you've done or the product you're working on.
Okay.
It was really inspiring.
And you've rented the office space, you started developing, and in 2013 you actually got acquired.
Yes.
So walk me through, what was the process like? You were one of the first ones who got kind of acquired from the Belgian startup ecosystem.
Yeah. Things went quite quickly, right? I mean, we at the time, like, it was all about, okay, raise money, don't ask, don't monetize, because we want you to go big or go home. And that's kind of the VC mentality, right? So they were not interested in having like a sustainable business. They wanted to go really big. And so we were basically burning through capital. We ended up raising like another 1.5 million, so 3.5 in total. But then we had to start, thinking about monetization and stuff. And so there was basically two paths forward. Either we would basically massively cut down the cost and start monetizing, what we have at that time, or we would explore basically being acquired. So we considered both. Also at the same time, like I had just become a father, so there was another startup on its own, right? Half of my seed capital, 9-month incubation. I was not the incubator. So all of that together, and I also felt like it was my very first startup, and I thought that, I made so many mistakes, because this is a crash course doing a startup. You learn by doing, which is fantastic, best way to learn. So I highly recommend it. But I also make a lot of mistakes. And so in the inside of me, I was like, I can't wait to actually do it again. Start again from scratch.
Okay.
And so that's why all of that led me to take on the path of actually, okay, let's sell the company now, and then let's build something else later.
Okay. And how was the process like? I could imagine that it's quite different from today, or it's not, of being acquired, because now it seems like a regular kind of thing to do. But I guess in 2013, it was quite of a new kind of newcomer to be acquired by a larger firm with a startup that you built from scratch by a random Belgian guy who came to Silicon Valley.
Look, I cannot compare because I haven't had an acquisition recently, so I cannot compare.
That's true.
But for sure, I mean, for me, it was definitely like a first time and quite an interesting experience. I learned a lot. But also, like, one of the things that I learned is that, like, the problem we have with startups is that there is an asymmetry of interest, and all the interests are not aligned. And that's why, like, who you have in your cap table, as an investor, it really matters. Because I ended up having a call on Sunday morning with a billionaire, right? For whom a few $1 million don't matter. For me, it would be life-changing, right? And so that's where the interests are not aligned. So from his perspective, it's much better. And I understand. It's much better to just, like, it's like if you will play at the casino and you will get like a few €100, then you will feel like, I may as well play that again, because it wouldn't change my life for a few €100. But maybe you can earn millions more, right? So that's kind of what's at play here. And so there's this asymmetry of, from a 20-year-old guy or something versus a billionaire that's already, and so that was a bit like a tough to handle and quite a life lesson there. But overall, I'm very, very grateful for the experience.
Okay, that's really cool. So 2013, what comes next?
So what comes next? So got acquired, had to work a bit for that acquire company, as it is usually the case. And then like, as I was kind of in between startups, thinking about what to build next, I stumbled upon that problem where there was, back in the days, it was the Snowden story that came out. And I felt like, I always cared about journalism and free speech, information, freedom of sharing stories of what's going on in the world. And so I decided to build like a small version, an easy version for journalists to receive tips, anonymous tips. And it became an open source project called Tipbox, and for which I got a grant from a foundation in the US. And I stumbled upon that problem where I said, like, okay, this is, it's an open source project. I enjoy doing this, but I don't want this to be a startup. So what do I do? Where do I put that money? A bank account? Don't want this to be an income directly to me. And then also like there's a community of people contributing to the open source project in Argentina, in Europe, in America. So it felt really wrong. And then it reminded me with my first company, Storify, where we couldn't build our startup without open source. That's for sure. There's not a single startup today that could exist without open source. And when we started having our first check of money, $2 million, for like, hey, how can we support that open source community? And also people were complaining, in open source, there is no money. Like people are not being paid. They do work for free over the weekend or in the evening. And then I realized that, okay, here we go. Now I have money. I want to give you some. Where do I put it? And that's when I realized that actually the bigger problem is that the internet has made it so easy for us to build those digital commons, open source, to create those communities that can do great things together. But once there is money involved, there is still no internet native way to receive money as a community. So if I want to support open source, I need an invoice as a company. Who is going to emit that invoice? Not the open source developer. That person only cares about, and rightfully so, about doing great code. And so that's how basically I stumbled upon what will become Open Collective, which is creating a new form of organization for our generation, the internet generation, that people could create as easily as a GitHub, as an open source project, or a Facebook group, or a meetup group. And that will enable the community to basically support them, to put money, receive an invoice, and then in a full open source, transparent way. And so that's how I started Open Collective in 2015. So that's already 10 years ago. And since then, there's been like, a couple of thousand, like 4,000 or 5,000 collectives. They raised together $130 million so far. And so we've been supporting many open source projects, but also mutual aid support during COVID and other citizen initiatives. So it's really about what I really came to realize is the power of open source, how much startups and software has been eating the world. And that's because we stopped reinventing the wheel every single time. We started sharing, right? So when I build a startup, I can build on top of the shoulders of the people that came before me and shared code in open source. And that's amazing because before open source, just the cost of starting, you had to pay a license to Microsoft to access SQL database, right? Or whatnot. It was just impossible. So the cost of creating a startup, starting your own company, fell down dramatically thanks to the benevolent contributors, to open source. And so imagine if we could have the same type of revolution in the way we build companies, organization. What would be the equivalent of an open source project as an organization? An organization that, people will come together, will share all their finance in open source, share all their decisions in open source, in such a way that we can also stop having all of those organizations left and right that are competing for no good reasons, that could instead collaborate and build on top of each other and complete. Don't compete, complete. That's really what I want to do with Open Collective.
I mean, you just said it, and I think that it's absolutely fascinating what you do. But maybe for listeners who are not kind of deeply into the open source, the decentralization topics, maybe it's a bit complicated to understand. So could you explain what does Open Collective actually do, like you did to me as last time we met? Just imagine that 6-year-olds are listening to us, and you could explain what does Open Collective do.
Yeah. So I think the best analogy is to look at the internet, actually. So at the beginning, in order to have your own website, your own blog, you had to basically know how to set up your own web server, right? And then you spend a lot of time doing that, and then, well done, now you can publish online. Then we realized that, well, you know what? If I know how to set up my own web server, maybe I can just share it with you so that you can focus on the content. And I'm going to be your webmaster, right? I'm going to be setting up the infrastructure. And then fast forward, we made it easier and easier over time to start your blog to a point that you didn't even know how to program. You just had to click a few buttons on WordPress.com or whatnot, or Twitter or whatnot. The result of that is an explosion of contribution, right? You go from a very limited number of people who can share, started with tech people who know the tech, to then people who do have the money to pay tech people to do it, to then eventually people who just need to know how to use an interface. And we've seen an explosion of content being shared, Wikipedia, YouTube, and so on. And to me, that's fantastic. So now the idea is to do the exact same thing with organization. If I know how to set up an organization, starting with nonprofits, doing the accounting, the reporting, all of that, it's a bit like, it's a lot of overhead. Well, if I know and if I've done it already and you want to do something that is quite similar, why don't we share? Right? So same idea. So you know what? So now you can start having your activity. And so it could be an open source project, right? Or it could be a play street, a citizen initiative, a citizen garden, whatever that you want to do, or a meetup. And then say like, hey, you know what? So we're going to have only one legal entity for all the meetups in Brussels, or one legal entity for all open source projects in Europe. I mean, you name it. But we're going to share it so that you get to focus on actually what you wanted to focus in the first place. Because when you wake up in the morning and you have a project, you have an idea, you don't wake up in the morning and feel like, I'm going to do some accounting today. That's great, right? No, this is distraction. This is getting in the way of creating value for the world and for society. So if we share, everybody get to focus more on what they're really good at and what they love doing or don't mind doing. And then we just, all get to enjoy so much more beauty.
Fantastic. So if we kind of put it in concrete terms, so you basically have one legal entity as a nonprofit that lets you kind of attach yourself to that nonprofit and share all of the kind of legal expertise and all of the administrative stuff. So you can focus on whatever you want to do, as building a nonprofit project, open garden, initiative, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And so Open Collective is basically a piece of software that helps you share an existing nonprofit. Okay. Right? So any nonprofit can use Open Collective to share the nonprofit, to make the nonprofit available to the community and kind of decentralize themselves. Right? So instead of having like in the old days where you would have like a Greenpeace, for example, or even a Linux Foundation, right? And then it would be like very top down and very siloed and very non-transparent and with a hierarchy and so on. And then every project had to be, come from the people who are employed by that entity. Now the new bottom-up way to do, decentralized way to do it, to say like, make a call to the community. Hey, you have an idea? Go do it. And then, we can host you. We become bottom-up, like a support, a piece of the puzzle so that you can do what it is that you want to do.
And operationally wise, how many of those kind of hosting organizations out there, and how do you choose one that you want to be associated with?
Yeah, I mean, right now there are hundreds of them and thousands of collectives hosted by them. But yeah, anyone can become a fiscal host. We call those nonprofit fiscal hosts, basically. And then you basically join one that is the closest to you and the closest in terms of values as well, right? I think the more they understand what you do, the better, right? So if you do an open source project, then there is the open source collective. They're already hosting 2,500 open source projects. So if you do an open source project, that will be the default place to go, right? They're based in the US, and so that would be the great place to go if, most of the people, you want to use dollars, right? Now, if you want to use euros, there is Open Collective Europe, for example, another nonprofit that might be a better fit. And so depending on where you are, it's a bit like also like when you do like a server on AWS, right? You basically pick the region that makes the most sense for you.
And I will play the kind of devil's advocate here, but in a sense that the main problem that you are solving is the incompetence of the government institutions. Whether it shouldn't be, it should be or shouldn't be like this, I think you know the answer to. But if we look at countries as Estonia, who has kind of maximally deviated the administrative burden from its startups, there is still some accounting that needs to be done, some recording, but it's at a minimal.
Yep.
How does Open Collective kind of deal with that? Or you're kind of more enforced on the countries who have a lot of bureaucracy, like Belgium, like the US?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like basically all of those countries are operating systems on top of which you build a business, right? And I think it's time for our generation, the internet generation, to build a global operating system, right? On top of which you can create businesses. And that's exactly what the blockchain is, and DAOs, and we can go back to that, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations. And there will be like different, countries, bureaucracies all around the world that would, administrate the local reality. And so to me, in this new world that is emerging right now, we are really at the intersection right now for the collapse of the current world based on nation states and their bureaucracies, and the emergence of a new one, right? Based on open source, open data, and the internet, really. And so to me, this new emerging world is about being rooted locally, but globally connected, right? At the end of the day, there is only two levels that exist in the universe, the level of bits and atoms. Bits, it's information. It can go anywhere the internet can go, right? Which is no limit all around the planet. And atoms, it's physicality. We are here in the same room, right? Anything in between, it's just a story, right? That used to be limited by the technology of information. So that's why some countries are limited by, physical mountains and stuff, because you couldn't basically cross it easily, right? It's about how long does it take to make sure an order can be communicated, to make sure that the bureaucracy can still happen, right? But so all of that is basically now moot with this new information technology that we have. And so that's what really I'm passionate about, which is how do we accelerate this transition? Because, well, there is an emergency. There is a climate emergency, and we need system change, not climate change, right? So a lot of things need to change. The current capitalistic way of organizing ourselves has run its course. It served us well, but now it's going, out of bound. So we urgently need a new system. And I believe that at the core of it needs to be this idea of rooted locally, globally connected, decentralized, open source, open data. Those to me are clear and obvious foundations on top of which good things can emerge.
That's a lot to unpack here, but let's kind of go back to the question. So the question is that either we kind of root inside a country with its bureaucratic processes, either easy or really, really bureaucratic, or we make it a complete decentralized field on top of which you can build your projects, open source, for profits, non-profits, and so on. But here you can kind of, from what I'm hearing, is that you basically say that soon the kind of borders of the countries will be erased and will become a big one decentralized platform for people to build stuff on.
So, I mean, things are not going to be, it's not binary, right? In the sense that there's going to be also like steps to get there, right? So I don't think that it's going to all happen like that in one go. I think that, like you mentioned Estonia, like indeed they're much more advanced in terms of digitalization, and it's so much easier to create a company there than in Belgium for sure. It doesn't change the fact that and even though as a Belgian I could create a company in Estonia, like it's still, for various different reasons, better to have a local entity, right? But I think there's going to be like kind of, when it comes to Open Collective, like there is two different aspects. There is one aspect is the idea of just sharing an entity so that people can focus more on their added value. And indeed, depending on the country where you are, it might be more or less of an added value depending of how much bureaucracy there is in your country, for sure. But then there is the other aspect as well, which is the idea of open sourcing your organization, right? So independently, whether or not you have your own legal entity or you are sharing one, and your own bank account, or if you are sharing one, or to keep the analogy, you have your own data center or you are sharing one. Independently of that, it's about moving from closed source, which is all about copyright, competing with each other, extracting more resources, winning, doesn't matter the externalities, to a world of open source, where we are not competing, we are completing each other. And everybody can see and check what are your externalities, right? And so to me, that's a fundamental system change.
Okay. I think that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because you have this kind of really different perspective from all the others. So let's kind of unpack one by one. So one thing is that it's easier to set up the entity that you want to do. The second of all is the transparency. So basically, everything you do can be seen and can be tracked on Open Collective via blockchain. Am I right?
Yeah. So right now, so I'm back at Open Collective, and with that purpose of making a new Web3 native version of it on the blockchain. So far, Open Collective has been a bit the Toyota Prius, an hybrid between the old fossil fuel industry and the new electric world, because we basically piggyback on the existing bureaucracies, and then we surface an abstraction layer that is more Web 2, that makes it easier to interact with the old bureaucracy. The full electric version, the native version, is basically using the blockchain, where you can basically easily create a bank account for your community with a few clicks, without having to deal with any bureaucracy. That being said, you're still going to need an interface, and that's where Open Collective comes in, to make it easy for people to use without knowing that they use the blockchain. Because honestly, who cares? Like, people shouldn't know. There's no need to know. The key thing, though, is indeed about having this concept of not closed source, walled garden entities, companies, non-profit, but open source ones. And for that, it means about surfacing everyone's contribution. And one of the key aspects is this idea of giving communities the tools they need to thrive. And that requires a lot of things. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. When I was a kid, the cool thing to do was doing a rock band in your garage, because it was all about MTV. Then when I graduated, the cool thing to do was to do a startup, right? Because of TechCrunch and so on. That was a cool thing to do. I think the new cool thing to do now in this new world of polycrisis, meta-crisis, is to start a community. Could be a cooperative, could be a DAO, which is a digital cooperative, but it's about starting a community. And a community is a different animal than a startup. A startup, in many ways, is very masculine, very young energy. Is you have a mission, you go get there, right? And a community, it's much more balanced. It has to have both yin and yang energy. You're gonna need much more balance. We need both an ability to attract resources for the community, and at the same time, we need the yin energy to take care of the community, right? And keep the community together. And so we're gonna need both. The problem is, we live in an economic system that only rewards performance, right? We only live with euros or dollars. We live in the monoculture of a single currency, a yang currency, a masculine currency that can only see what can fit in a spreadsheet, what can be measured, performance, competition. No surprise that men tend to be paid more, that women have to struggle to be acknowledged and rewarded properly, right? And so kind of as a reaction to that, there's been kind of the feminist movement that was basically trying to not questioning that system, that monoculture of a single currency, of a single measuring stick to measure your contribution. And so instead, we're trying to say like, no, we're going to try to fit in that system that by design was designed by men for men. Right now, I think we are the emergence of a new paradigm, which is about communities. And in this paradigm, we need two types of contribution, masculine and feminine contributions. And that's why like in this, I want Open Collective to basically give communities the tools they need to have not only manage euros or dollars, but also issue their own yin currency, a currency that's gonna finally acknowledge and reward and value properly the yin contribution that are so important to make a community thrive.
Mm-hmm. So you basically have two types of measuring sticks. So you have a more performance-based measuring, and you have the second, as you mentioned, a more feminine-like or young-like measuring stick that measures basically the beauty or the energy.
Things that cannot be measured.
The things that cannot be measured.
And turns out those are the most important things that make life worthwhile.
Okay, could you bring examples?
Well, if you this where we are right now, we are the Commons Hub in Brussels. This is all about the commons. It's a shared co-working space, a shared event space. All right, it's managed as a common resource by a community, and this is about actually pursuing the work of Elinor Ostrom, who was the first woman Nobel Prize of Economics for her work on the commons. And as a quick parenthesis, what are the commons? Basically, commons are basically common resources. Because it turns out that the biggest crisis of it all, the climate crisis, is rooted in the fact that we forgot how to manage common resources together, starting with the air quality, right? And Elinor basically showed that there is a third way to manage those common resources. The first way was basically the story we've been told that it's better to privatize, build fences, put those resources in the hands of shareholders. They will do what's best. That just pursuing efficiency, performance is actually the best way to manage the resource. Turns out it leads to extinction, depletion of resources, burnouts, and so on. The second way is the state, basically. Then the government should take care of that. Well, it turns out then you end up with bureaucracy and people who are not really, very top-down bureaucracy. And the third way is to basically say like, no, you know what? The people who should manage those common resources are the people who actually use and depend on that resource. Turns out those are the best people that know how to manage it because their life depends on it, right? And so those are the commons. And this is the goal and the purpose of this community here is to put the commons back, in the daylight as a system change, as part of the system change that we need. And so it's a community. And to maintain this space, to use as a co-working space, as an event space, it's not like a classic co-working when you just pay, 350 euros a month, whatnot, and then it's just a transaction. You can spill coffee, it's fine, somebody else is paid to clean after you. Tomorrow you can move. Bye. Your debt is settled. It was just a transaction. There is no community. Here at the Commons Hub, you need to pay in two currencies. The yang currency, because we still need to pay the rent, and the yin currency, which is contribution to the space, to clean the space, water the plants, right? Take care of the community. And that's really important because all of those type of work are super important to make this space thrive. This space is so much more alive when there is those plants, for example, and that they are alive themselves because people took care of them, right? When the space is clean. And so that's really about realizing that we need those two currencies. And I don't care how many millions you have. You cannot use the resource of the community if you don't also contribute to the community. Because that's the thing. Isn't it crazy today that you have a piece of euro or dollar? Nobody knows how you earned it. You may have gotten it for free by inheritance and done nothing. You may have actually got it because you abused human resources or natural resources, or you may earn it like because you've done a startup and you really created value. But a euro is a euro, a dollar is a dollar. And so it doesn't matter. So the kind of underlying message that we are giving subconsciously to people and say like, hey, you know what? We don't really care really how you earn your money. So you may as well find the easiest, fastest way to get it. And all the doors will be open to you. You will be able to travel anywhere and go anywhere. Well, no more. No more. Because that sets the wrong incentive. So the incentive of just finding the fastest, easiest way doesn't matter the externalities, doesn't matter how many resources you burn. And so that's why I think it's important now in this new rooted locally, globally connected world, decentralized world, that locally every communities come together, start creating goods and services together that are available for more than one currency, to change the incentives. That my incentive now, as someone living here in Brussels, for example, is not to just work my ass off to burn out for a multinational that can only pay me in this community currency, this kind of commodity currency, the euro. My incentive now is to say like, you know what? I would rather work only 4 days a week and keep 1 day a week where I can contribute to my local community, the space, the co-working space I'm part of, or whatnot. Because that way, I will get more than one currency in my wallet, and I will have access to more doors, to more optionality. So it totally changes the incentives.
I think it's really fascinating. Let's kind of explain to our listeners. So we started from decentralization from the government institutions. So basically building on top of Open Collective, your project. Then we kind of moved on to the borderless situation that it will come. It will come not soon, but maybe you could elaborate on that. You have really interesting thoughts that a town or a community should have its own currencies, and it's being decentralized from the federal government.
Yeah, so I mean, first you can start today, right? There is all of that. The future is already present. It's just not evenly distributed yet, right? I mean, this space is actually a good example, and there are many other spaces like that, or like cooperatives, right? Grocery store cooperatives like the Biscoe, Park Slope in the US. So you can definitely start today, and we need more of them, right? So I really want to encourage people who think about, starting. It's a startup. It's a new startup for the 21st century. It is a community. It is a cooperative or digital cooperative. That's the new startup. So definitely start today. Don't wait. I think like eventually every city basically is a DAO. A city is a decentralized, autonomous organization. It's an organism. And like any organism, it thrives when there are a lot of interaction within, right? The intelligence is an emerging property when you have independent agents that bump into each other. And that's why cities have always been the bed of innovation, because you just bump into so many more people in cities that you will do in the countryside, right? And so in order to create more economic activity and exchanges within a community, you basically need to create incentives for that. If you only have one single currency, a global one, like the euro, if I give you a euro, you are free to spend it on Amazon. But if I give you a local currency, you can only spend it within the local community. Now, you will still be able to exchange it for another currency that will help you spend it on Amazon if you want, but that becomes not the default value. There is a bit of a friction there, right? And I'll say like the future is already present, not evenly distributed yet. I have here because there is already more than 5,000 of those local currencies in Europe alone, right? And I have here a couple of examples. This one is in Charleroi, the Carolor, for example, Volti here. Like there is a bunch of different local currencies. I love this one. It's a great word trick, sourire in French. But this is the one of Brussels called the Zin, right? It's been around for 5 years. And so to me, like all of those are examples. This is another local currency. I think it's in the US. I think it's called the dollar. I don't know. It's a shit coin. Nobody knows how it's printed. But anyway, like there is like, and the one that is the most successful is this one, is the Yushko. It's in Pays Basque country. They've like, more than 1 million in circulation. And they've been around for 10 years. And this one is really, really working quite well. And to me, like, this is a good example where like there's all of those local currencies already happening. Most of them don't really work, right? It's more like kind of side project in a way, citizen initiatives. A few of them work well. But to me, it shows that, okay, this is a good signal. When you see that people do something, even though they don't have the technology for it yet, it shows that they care about it so much, they see that it's a good idea so much that they are willing to get started, even though the technology is not there yet. Right? And that's a fantastic place as a general rule to start a project and use technology. Because now they say like, okay, so people really want it, but it's not really working. Even though it's not really working, they still do it. They really do care. All right, how can we contribute? How can we basically, with the technology, with the know-how of the people doing startups, how can we support all of those local communities that want to basically support local economy? We need to do that.
Okay, and in practicalities, how would, for example, let's take Belgium as an example. So Brussels has its own currency, Kortrijk has its own currency, Charleroi has its own currency.
Yeah.
But the interaction within the country even is needed. White euro was created to ease off the trade, to kind of lift the borders and free the currency exchange, free the trade exchange. How does it support the free market?
So I think the euro, we talk about the CBDC now, the central bank digital currencies. I think a better future for the euro would be to be a platform on top of which any city, any region in Europe can create their own currency, right? Because all of those local currencies, they are pegged to the euro, which means that one zin in Brussels is worth €1. One Eusko in Pays Basque is worth €1. So ideally, there is kind of this European level currency, right, on top of which you can create your own.
Okay.
Right? In the same way that on top of YouTube, you can create your own channel.
And so the main incentive is that if you receive your money as a salary in Brussels centralized currency, that you're more incentivized to spend it in Brussels.
Yeah, because basically if I have a local currency here in Brussels, like the zin, for example, I can only spend it in Brussels.
Okay.
Right? And if I want to spend it outside of the local economy, well, I have to take a few steps.
Okay.
Which is okay. So you don't prevent, but you create a natural barrier so that the incentive, the default value is, you know what? If I can choose, it's much better for me to use the local economy to make sure, because you know what? Turns out that happiness is about living in a healthy environment. Impacts you so much more than you being rich and having all the latest gadgets from around the world just on your own, right? So it's about, and we've been too far in one direction. So now it's about kind of refinding a good balance between the two. So it's not against, it's not or, it's and, right? But it's about refocusing on the health of your local economy, of your local environment. It's about winning together, right? Creating a healthy, regenerative environment, both for the yin and the yang energy, for male and female contribution, everyone's contribution. And this is what we need.
Okay. And if you mentioned you built kind of a natural barrier, so you are not incentivized to spend it elsewhere outside your community, but isn't decentralization all about removing the barriers? And isn't the, for example, European centralized currency, it's just removing all boundaries. You can spend it everywhere you want.
Yes, but then if there is no boundary, then there is no organism. Like every cell has a boundary. every organism is defined by its boundaries. So the problem is not boundaries. The problem is in the interaction between the different entities, right? Right now, for example, like why is it that Liège in Belgium, right, which is closer to Maastricht than Antwerp, right? Like they should have more economic interactions with that, even though it's a different country, right? Or in terms of language, right? This should maybe, with Germany, like there is all of those fictional borders that we have that actually get in the way, right? And so, anyway, like I think like, look, there's still a lot of open questions, but what's for sure is that the current trajectory we are in, where every single thing can be bought for euros, that create an incentive for people to find the cheapest, fastest way to earn them. And if there are so many ways that are totally disconnected from real contribution to your local community, it just leads to extinction, literally. It leads to depletion of human and natural resources. Everybody knows it, right? You don't even need to read the IPCC report to realize that something is not really going quite well in the current economic system. And we've just been going too far in this destruction of the local economic tissue in order to have one single global one. And again, that's not against having a global one. It's about making sure that we have both. To me, a healthy situation will be rooted locally and globally connected. We still need a global currency. We still need to have global exchanges, but we also need to have global exchanges between healthy local environments.
Okay, that's. I think that's hopefully all of the governors and mayors of the European towns are listening to the podcast, and then they have some ideas sparked into their minds.
I mean that would be great, but also I believe like much more in bottom up. Like I don't expect Microsoft ended up changing, not because people at Microsoft, but because people left Microsoft and then started building startups. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they had to turn around and realize that, okay, maybe that's the way to go. So I wouldn't like try to lobby anyone and try to convince anyone. Start with a coalition of the willings, people in your environment, in your community that already get it. Start building places like this one or other cooperatives or digital cooperatives. And then the score will take care of itself. People at some point will realize that, oh my gosh, this is so much better to work in a co-working space that has a community, rather than working in this transactional space, right? People will basically, the body keeps the score, and people will just see.
Okay. And if you would build something in a country that you really, really love, and you would like to have a big change, in a sense, how would you do it? Is that you have a working bureaucratic system. Maybe it's easier to set up a company in other countries, like in Estonia. Maybe it's harder, like in Belgium. But how do you kind of start? So basically, you have this place, this quite centralized community. But how do you incentivize the governments to build a community-based economy that doesn't deplete the natural resources and distributes the resources evenly?
Well, you just start. Don't wait for anyone. You don't need to have anyone's permission to do what's the right thing to do to regenerate your community and your environment.
But it will not affect kind of on the bigger scale the government institutions.
It does not matter. This is outside of your control, right? So like the best way to turn around Microsoft was to leave Microsoft and start building a startup, right? And eventually, if they are smart, they will basically join the movement, right? Not everybody did that, and they failed, right? So, and I think it's going to be the same for governments. So I think the smart governments will basically see that citizens are already doing it, and they will support and embrace the movement, right? Other countries will probably fight it. Mm-hmm. In any case, our job as citizens, as entrepreneurs, as tech people, is to build.
Okay.
Build, and don't wait for anyone's permission. Just go do it. Go do the right thing. And if you really do create value, if you really achieve to create community, don't worry. It will be irresistible. People will have to join you or support you.
And if when you're talking about the building stuff, what do you mean? So, in a sense that if you're building a centralized community, mentioned you're doing a currency, would you expect it to have such an effect that the government says, "Oh, they are building something really, really nice, something cool that will kind of transform all of the world"? Wouldn't it be easier to have it building it centralized, so a community or an institution that helps you build like Open Collective? So you go inside, for example, Estonia, inside Belgium, and you start, okay, we need to transform the economic part of Belgium, we need to transform the education and so on, and start building the initiatives. And government should kind of help, and because government is the representative of us.
Yeah, so ideally, to me, like what's important really is this idea of intrinsic motivation. You cannot, a bureaucrat, a politician cannot possibly have the time and the energy and the same energy and motivation that someone who is basically experiencing the problem firsthand, right, and needs to build to solve it. So to me, ideally, all those governments, politicians, and so on are basically there as support, basically, to say like, okay, we're gonna get out of the way, and we're gonna basically do everything we can to stay out of the way. Basically, that's the best way to support, which is a bit like counterintuitive. But the thing is, like, bureaucracy has reached such a point today that the best way to support those initiatives is not subsidies. Is not cost whatever. It is actually getting out of the way and maybe creating pockets of innovation, pockets of highlands of sanity, basically, within which, under certain conditions, like, you know what, we say like, maybe if you're gonna operate as an open source organization, if you're gonna share everything openly, then you know what, we are not going to ask you to file any report. Because why do we ask you to file any report and report taxes and VAT and so on in the first place? It's because we used to organize ourselves as closed source organization. So the only way for the administration, for the bureaucracy to know what we do was to basically ask us for a report. But if we do that, everything in open source, and all the data is there, it's in open data. So that would be my dream, so to speak, really. It would be to have like places in the world that will basically say like, you know what, if you do all of this in open data and in open source, we have access to all the data. So we're gonna get out of your way. We're gonna send you the bill to make sure that you contribute, because I'm absolutely not against paying taxes, to the opposite. But I'm absolutely against you, the bureaucracy, the government, bothering me, asking me to work for you, basically, to do your work. That's the crazy part. We as a community, let's go back to how those governments started and administration started. We are together. Okay, we are growing. The village is growing. Okay, we need to keep track of, birth, death, and resources and all of that. Okay, you know what? If everybody has to do that, it's not really gonna work. It's not really gonna scale. What about we start an organization, an institution? We're gonna pool resources together. We all gonna contribute according to our means, taxes, so that we can hire people to do the work, so that we can all continue teaching, growing food, cooking, you name it, innovate, whatever. Great. So we are coming together to pay people to do the administrative work. Today, we are in this crazy situation where the people who are paid with our money are asking us to do work for them. That's upside down. That's totally upside down. And that's to be the crazy thing. I'm back in Belgium. I've been living for 10 years in the US. I'm back for 6 years here. The amount of time I need to spend on bureaucracy compared to the US, it's night and day, and it's crazy. It is absolutely insane. Like, the underlying message is, don't start your own thing. Work for an existing institution that will take care of that for you. And that's crazy. And yet, in the US, for me, as a European, I thought that, oh, wow, it is so much easier to start a business there. And yet, apparently, it's still too much bureaucracy that now they even have Doge and all those type of things to make it even easier, right? And so anyway, I think like my point is we are wasting way too much resources today in Europe in general. We pay too many people whose only job is to control, right? To basically slow down people who just want to open a shop, right? And that's crazy. And so, yes, that's my ask to answer a question to existing governments, associations, bureaucracies, and so on. Please, under certain condition, find ways to unleash the energy of your citizens. Make sure that within certain conditions, you can basically do the work for them, because by the way, they pay you. So that's the way it should be.
I think that's really interesting. I will go into practicalities. So I think that one thing that I really kind of understood is that if you have open source data inside a for-profit, non-profit, it doesn't really matter. If you have it open sourced, then you will not need so much reporting done by the company for the institution that they're reporting for. But then the question comes that some of the data could be sensitive and that you wouldn't like other people to know it. For example, you are a business that is navigating in a certain environment and you wouldn't like other businesses, your competitors, to know your data openly. How do you solve this problem?
Well, I mean, first, it's like exactly like we had those discussions with the beginning of open source already, right? Should we do this open source or not? Then no competitors will be able to access it. And we had those debates before. Turns out the value is in the community. The value is in the connections, the relationships, right? So I think eventually, like we've seen with open source, more and more people will realize that this is the way to go. But in the meantime, you know what? It's okay. We're not forcing anyone. You want to continue building a 20th century style for profit? Go for it. You know the rules, but here is a ton of bureaucracy you're going to have to do. But, go. Fine.
Okay. So basically,
but you want to create a 21st century for the internet age organization that is open source and open data? Yes, please. And we should roll out the red carpet for you. This is great. It means that because you are sharing everything, you are genuinely doing this for the community. This is amazing. We should applaud that. We should support that. Doesn't mean that we should forbid the old, but we should roll the red carpet for all of those people who genuinely want to just solve problems for the community, create value. How cool is that? We have a shit ton of problems right now in the world. We should enable them. Seriously.
Okay, I think that's really cool. What you mentioned is that you basically incentivize, but you do not set boundaries. Again, you do not. You can continue doing it the traditional way, spending money on reporting, or you can do it open source and kind of have the reporting minimized.
Exactly. And by the way, if you're gonna ask money from public money, then you have to be transparent.
That's really true. Yes.
And if you don't want to be transparent, no problem. But then don't ask my money, because if you ask my money as an investor, then I'm gonna be able to see exactly how you spend it. Mm-hmm. So
no, I think that's the point that is the most kind of straightforward. That the government institutions, they absolutely need to be open sourced.
Totally. To me, like this is another thing, besides creating those islands of sanities and rolling the red carpet for those open source organizations, the other thing that government should absolutely do that is even easier, should be a no-brainer, which is every single subsidy they give to anyone should be on the blockchain. That's a no-brainer. I think it's such a no-brainer that the future generation will wonder, why did it take us so long to do it? Because it's so obvious. It's public money. It's your money. It's my money. We are all contributing to that pot of money. We all ought to know how it is spent. You have a problem with that? Just don't ask for the money of the community. There are plenty of other ways. But if you do, it better be transparent.
Yes, I fully agree. And I think there is the problem that basically such a complex, I would say, data set as the government spending. They have, I don't know how many millions of stuff that they spend the money on. And the problem is that even in small countries like Estonia, they don't really know what the money is being spent for. The same example with the US with Doge now, they are discovering the ways that the government is spending the money that was not firstly intended to be spent on. So I think that's really true. If you could kind of transcend one message to the governments of European, but not only in European countries, what will it be? What will be first practical steps? How to implement the open source data into the government institutions?
I mean, first, start small. It's hard enough. So identify what would be and maybe it's at the local level or maybe it's a particular program, but start somewhere small. For example, for the EU, they have some money for open source software. This is great. It's actually, it's money literally for open source communities. Why is that money not publicly on the blockchain? That, of all places, that would be the place to start. But then locally, there's a bunch of different subsidies left and right for various different activities that also should be open source, right? And then, because I had this thing, I used to organize play streets and then my daughter organized one and she applied for having that subsidy to get it. And same thing, that's the thing. I did, of course, use Open Collective and I was totally open source about all the expenses and stuff, right? And then a few months later, after the play street, the administration came back to me, hey, you didn't file a report for it. We are waiting for the report. And I just shared the link. Here is the open ledger. You see all the expenses, you have all the data, right? What else do you need? I said, thank you, but no, it has to be in this format and that format. I said, okay, I am paying you, right? You should be come on, you have the data. But to me, it's a good example of at every level. And that's why there is no excuse to wait for anyone. Because whether at your own personal individual level, when you start your own company or you start your own nonprofit or own citizen initiative, there is nothing that stops you for at your level to be transparent. So start there, right? But then at the level of when you receive a subsidy, for example, well, nothing stops you from being transparent. But then since the question is what can authorities do? Well, they should embrace it. And they should also, find a spot that is small and start there, be transparent there. But then like that, there will be a ripple effect where it will become obvious, more and more obvious that, now, when there is a call for projects, when they have subsidies to give, and there are people who have an history of being transparent about their finance, naturally, those ones will tend to win those projects more because they represent a lower risk to justify how the money has been spent. So you see, over time, it will become obvious.
I think that's a fascinating conversation that we have and had. I think we should wrap up this conversation with a quick question. The podcast is called SuperHero Conversations, and we want to discover the superpowers of each founder, of each tech ecosystem player. So my question to you is, what is your superpower?
What is my superpower? I guess maybe the naivety, maybe, and the fearlessness, right? Because you need to be naive to be an entrepreneur, right? You need to and to be fearless, to just to believe so much into something and say fuck it, nothing's gonna be in my way to basically make it happen. So I think that would be maybe the superpower that I would imagine, because once you jump, things turn out to be okay most of the time. So it's really a matter of fear. I think humans have evolved to become really good at adapting to an environment, the environment, but really bad at changing environment, right? So it's about, if you really want to change, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you really want to change your environment. And without thinking, without realizing, you will change. Because the environment has so much influence on you in ways that you cannot possibly apprehend. And that's why, actually, the question of taking care of our environment is actually not, a vitamin, it's a painkiller. We're all going to be much better off if we live in thriving environment, in thriving ecosystems.
I think that's really interesting to see how your thoughts of founding a startup and being this traditional, as you call it, young energy, and kind of striving for profit. I would say maybe not even monetary, but profit for the society as well. And how you transform this knowledge of building a startup into something much bigger. I have a question. You mentioned naivety. I think one main strength of children is that they are naive in a good way. So they are not kind of hurt by the external factors of the society. So what is the advice to all of the naive founders, to all the naive entrepreneurs? Maybe they're young, maybe they're a bit older. How do you keep that naivety?
You force yourself to go, to go explore, to put yourself in outside of your comfort zone, and to re-experience again and again that is actually, it's actually okay. It's not as bad as I thought. It's not that impossible. Having like this lived experience is really important. Right? The lived experience of, I'm doing something, I don't have all the answers, but I entrust the universe, I trust the ecosystem, the environment, the community, that, answers will come. And once you experience that, then you are unstoppable.
That's... I think we should do a quote here and kind of quote that. And maybe my last question would be that you mentioned a lot of topics that on the things that needs to be changed, that will change, that governments are changed, and so on. But the problem I see with all of those kind of really ambitious talks, really positively naive talks, it's often hard to start somewhere. So maybe you could bring out some incentives or some practicalities that all of our listeners could start with to build the future of our communities. Really practical, really hands-on that they could do today.
Yeah, get involved in your local community. Join the local cooperative in whatever topic is interesting to you. Start a co-working or join a co-working and start a community there. Use any topic is fair game. Anything is an excuse to bring people together, right? And start there, because one thing leads to the other. You don't need to know. You don't have to have the answer. So that's the thing. Because when I was in between startup, I was also a bit frustrating, to be honest. Like, what should I work on next? And and then when you don't have the answer, I think one big mistake that we often do because of our education or whatnot is to try to get to the answer directly. But we live in such a complex world and changing environment that actually I don't think it's possible. Like, what are the odds that at the first throw you're going to hit the target? Right? So to me, it's about, if you don't know what to work on next, if you don't know what to do next, think about your environment. What are the ingredients that I know should be part of it? Right? So that may mean that you need to move or not. That may mean that you need to meet certain people, right? Hang out more in those different places. Basically put yourself in an environment where the solution will emerge.
Xavier, thank you so much for this conversation. I think there are a lot of topics that are global that we do not have the answer yet to, that we'll need to make that chain of thought. So thank you for coming. And the listeners, if you want to meet people like this, like Xavier, with big thoughts, big ambitions, and cool ideas, please come to SuperNova. That is happening on the 27th and the 20th of March in Antwerp, Belgium. And see you all guys there. Thank you.
Thank you.